Hello, welcome to Class Time, your daily classroom for CSEC and CAPE students. You can watch this lesson in real time on Television Jamaica's YouTube channel or One Spot Media. We are also live on gojamaica.com. If you have any questions on today's subject, you can send them in up to Television Jamaica's Facebook page at Television Jamaica or Instagram at television_Jamaica or use the hashtag TVJClassTime. We want to see those questions. Our first lessons for today is CSEC Biology, and I am Jerome Wright. Today we'll be looking at movement and support. So let's get into it. So movement and support, and we want to go according to your syllabus. And your syllabus, we should be able to distinguish between growth movements in plants and animals, relate the structure of the skeleton to its function in humans, and discuss the importance of locomotion in animals. We also want you to be able to describe the mechanism of movement in a human forelimb. So before we go into the lesson, we want to differentiate on some terms that are used for this topic. And the two terms that we want to distinguish is, we want to look at the difference between movement and locomotion. Now, what do we mean by movement? A movement is just a displacement of part of an organism, while the entire organism remains stationary. So, for example, I'm here waving my hand. Right? My entire body is stationary. My arms are just being displaced, so that's movement. Now, when we look at locomotion, now is the displacement of the entire organism from point A to point B. So I'm skipping, right? My entire body is changing location. That is locomotion. So movement, the body, entire body remains stationary. Part of it changes location, like waving my hand. Locomotion, entire body moves from point A to point B. So it's a displacement of the entire or whole organism from one place to the next. And so you have locomotion occurring in animals, and you have movement will occur in plants. Yes, plants can move. I know it might sound strange, but yes, plant does undergo movement, right? But they do not undergo locomotion. Now, what are some of the importance of locomotion? One, to find food. Plants do not need to undergo locomotion to find food because they make their own food by photosynthesis. Whilst us as animals, we have to go and hunt for food. Right? When I'm hungry, I can't go out and stand up in the sun and open my arms and get food. I have to go and prepare food. Also, to escape from predators. You know, no animals want to be eaten. Right? So in the jungle, predators coming, organisms need to get away. To look for mates. Plants don't need to locomote in order for reproduction to occur. Right? They have agents that does pollination. Right? But for us animals, we have to move in order to find mate, or locomote in order to find mate. Also to disperse offspring and to find favorable habitats, like the birds that migrate during hurricane seasons and so forth. So these are the reasons why, or the importance of locomotion in animals. Now, as I said before, plants does undergo movement, and we're going to see how plants actually does this. So plant movements include movement towards light, and you have opening and closing of flowers, growth of development roots, and movement of roots to find water, nutrients, etc. Now, plant movement can be classified into two types. And the first type is tropism, which is growth movement. Right? And this growth movement is, there's a potted plant on the window, and you see the potted plant moving towards the sunlight. So that is phototropism. So the plant is growing towards the light source. So that's a tropic movement. Right? Later on in the syllabus, when you look at irritability, we're going to look more on how the plant actually is able to grow towards the light source. So tropism involves growth movement. And this occurs in the stem and roots of plant. Our next type of movement is a non-growth movement, and this is called nastic movement. And this is, unlike tropism, it does not involve growth. Right? All it involves is the change in the turgidity of the cells. So for example, the mimosa species, or what we in Jamaica call the shame old lady. You know, you touch the leaves and the leaves wilted. That's a form of nastic movement. Also, hibiscus tends to fold their leaves at night. And that is also a nastic movement. So it's a non-growth movement, unlike tropism. And the movement to the stimulus is not in direction to the stimulus, unlike phototropism and geotropism, where the plant grows towards the stimulus. In nastic movement, the movement is not determined by the direction of the stimulus. But as I said, when you do irritability, which is a topic that comes up in grade 11 biology, we'll go more into that. Now, locomotion and movement in animals is facilitated by two systems, the muscular system and the skeletal system, or what we call the musculoskeletal system. So involve your muscles and your skeleton. So we're going to look at the skeletal system. But before we go into that, we want to let you be aware that there are different types of skeleton. You have the exoskeleton, and as the name suggests, exo means on the outside. So these organisms, their skeleton is on the outside, like they're insects. So they have the exoskeleton, which is made of chitin, is on the outside of the organism. So that's exoskeleton. Then we have hydrostatic skeleton, and this type of skeleton is found in like earthworms or soft-bodied animals. And their skeleton is formed by fluid-filled compartments within the body. And these fluid compressed against muscles and so help with movement. Now here comes what we have, endoskeleton. So exo means outside, endo means inside. So our skeleton is within our bodies, so you can't really see our skeleton. So endoskeleton consists of hard mineral structures located within soft tissues. So it's inside of the body of the organism. And that is the type of skeleton that we are going to look at going forward. Now, the skeleton has major roles in our bodies. And the first role is support. So our skeleton builds our framework, in which all the other body organs are supported by. So it helps to form our shape and posture and so forth. Protection. For example, your rib cage protects your lungs and your heart. Your cranium, which is found in the head, protects your brain. So your vertebral column, that is spine that goes down, protects your spinal cord. So your skeleton helps with the protection of soft-bodied organs. Movement is also one of the functions of the human skeleton. Without the skeleton, we could not move. And movement is brought about when muscles contract and pull on the bones that are within our skeleton. The production of blood cells are produced in the bone marrow of our skeleton. And also, it is also a storage for minerals like your calcium and your phosphorus. So the human skeleton, movement, support, protection, production of blood cells, and the storage of minerals. So you can see that our skeleton has a lot of function. Now, you should know all the different parts of the human skeleton. And I told my students, and I'm telling you that it's good to get a picture of a skeleton, hang it up somewhere in your room, so you see it before you go to your bed at night, so when you wake up in the early morning, you are seeing it, because you need to know all the different bones of the human skeleton. So you need to know the major bones, the clavicle, humerus, the femur, the tarsals, and students normally mix the tarsals with the carpals. So you have to know the tarsals are found within your foot and the carpals within your hand. Right? So do not mix up the two terms. So carpals, hand, carpal tunnel syndrome, hands, and tarsals, your feet. Right? So you need to know the major bones of the human skeleton. The patella, same thing you call your kneecap. Your clavicle, called the collarbone. The scapula, your shoulder blade, radius and ulna. Right? So this you need to know. So get a diagram of the human skeleton, and in your spare time, you sit down and you go through the different parts, try to visualize it in your head, where different bones are located. And so it may seem overwhelming now, but I can guarantee you, as soon as you get into it, you will know the different parts of the human skeleton. Now, the human skeleton can be divided into two parts. You have the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. And how do you differentiate the parts? As you can see in this diagram, which is color-coded, right, the axial skeleton is the main axis of the skeleton. So it consists of your cranium, your spinal cord, and your rib cage. Right? So it's the central axis of your skeleton. Cranium, spinal cord, rib cage, and your breastbone. Those form the axial skeleton, the central aspect of your skeleton. And then you have the appendicular, which branch off from the main axis. So you have your limbs, with your hands and your legs, as well as the girdles. Right? And the girdles in skeleton is those things that attach the limbs to the axial skeleton. That's what girdles in biology mean. Right? So you have the pectoral girdles, which connects your hands to the axial skeleton, and you have the pelvic girdle that connects your legs to the axial skeleton. And we're going to go into different parts as we move forward. So the pars skeleton, axial, and appendicular. All right, so we're going to start with the axial skeleton first, and the first thing we're going to look at is your cranium. All right, so again, the cranium made up of a number of flat bones, and these bones are joined together at fixed joints, and these fixed joints is called sutures. As you can see, it looks like stitches. You know, back in the days when grandma used to stitch clothes, you know, put different cloths together and stitch them. Right? So you can see that's what they call it, sutures, because they look like stitches. Right? So that's the cranium, and the function of the cranium, as I said, a part of the function of the human skeleton is to protect your brain. Right? So that's the skull. Then you have the vertebral column, which is your backbone. Right? And it's made up of 33 bones, is in your human vertebral column. Right? And each of these vertebrae is separated by a disc of cartilage. Right? And this is what it looks like. All right, so these are different parts of the vertebrae. There are 33 bones in all. So 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and then you have the coccyx. We are going to take a break, quick break, and we'll back with more on biology.
Here, interactive classes for all ages on the School Time channel on onespotmedia.com. With a combination of live Zoom classes and recorded class time, Schools Not Out lessons, and numerous educational content, we've created a comprehensive 24-hour channel dedicated exclusively to educating our nation's youth. Early childhood through to primary, secondary, and tertiary, it's one stop on one spot for education 24 hours. Brought to you by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in association with Television Jamaica Limited.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
Welcome back. This is CSEC Biology, and we are discussing movement and support. And before we went for the break, we were looking at the different aspects or the different parts of the axial skeleton. We look at the cranium, and we are now at the vertebral column. And we said that the vertebral column is made up of 33 bones. And these 33 bones more or less have similar basic structure. Right, and they are stacked one on top of each other, right, with a hollow tube in the middle, and this hollow tube is where your spinal cord passes. Right, so they help to protect. One of the functions of the vertebral column is that they helps to protect the spinal cord. Right, and for those who eat the turkey neck, when you get it, you can look at it, and if you look in the center, you see a hollow tube. Right, that is your spinal cord, and the turkey neck is just basically the cervical vertebrae of the bird or the chicken neck if you eat chicken neck. Right? Those are just the cervical vertebrae. So I said there are 33. The two last ones, the sacral and the caudal vertebrae, what they call the coccyx, those are fused vertebrae. So the sacral is fused, made up of 5 fused bone, and the coccyx is made up of 4 fused bone. Right? So in all we have 33. All right, so this is what they looks like. So they are stacked on top of each other. All right, and this is a spinal cord that runs through the center or the cavity. We're going to look at what the cavity is called later on. And in between each of the disc, or the vertebrae, there are cartilage discs between them. So we're going to compare the 3 major vertebrates because you need to know how to distinguish between the 3 major ones. So the 3 major vertebrae you have is the cervical, the thoracic, and the lumbar. And I said you need to know how to distinguish between each because questions will come. They probably put a vertebrae on the question paper, ask you to distinguish which one it is, and they may ask you to justify why is it that you think that this is that vertebrae. Now the cervical vertebrae, and I forgot to mention the first 2 vertebrates, the cervical C1 and C2, they are unique in that the way they are shaped. The first one is called the atlas and the second is called the axis, and they allows you to shake your head and nod your head, forming the pivot joint. Right? But for the cervical, for the most part, this is what it looks like, apart from the axis and the atlas, which is the first 2 vertebrates. Now, I just said they all have the same basic structure. Right? So they all have a neural spine, they have a neural canal, they have a centrum, they have transverse processes. Right? It's just that the size and the appearance may look a little bit different, but the same basic structures apply for all vertebrae. Now, how do you differentiate cervical vertebrae from all the rest of other vertebrates? One thing you need to look at is these 2 holes sorry. 2 holes at the sides of the vertebrae. Those are called the vertebral arterial canal. No other vertebrate has those 2 holes. And these 2 holes facilitate the running of the blood vessels to and from the head. They also have a very short, small neural spine. Right? And that's to facilitate the turning of the head. So their neural spine is very small compared to the rest of vertebrate. And they have 2 holes at the sides called the vertebral arterial canal. They also have a very large neural canal, as you can see right there. And that is to facilitate the enlarged brain stem that's formed at the back of the hinder part of the brain. So the neural canal is large, because the neural canal is where the spinal cord runs through or passes through. So the neural canal is large to facilitate the brain stem. Right? So from a look at it, vertebral arterial canal, large neural canal, and short neural spine, you know that is a cervical vertebrae. Now the next one is the thoracic vertebrae. And that is found in the thoracic region. Now the thoracic vertebrae, the distinguishing feature is that it has a very long neural spine. It has short transverse processes. I know the diagram kind of don't give it justice, but it has a very long neural spine compared to the rest. It has very short transverse processes, and that is to facilitate the rib cage, articulation with the rib cage. The neural canal is smaller compared to the cervical, and their centrum is larger than the cervical, but it is not as large as the other one that we're going to show you. Right? Now the next one is your lumbar vertebrae. So remember, thoracic vertebrae, long neural spine, short transverse processes, small neural canal. The lumbar vertebrae has long and wide neural spine. They also have long and wide transverse processes, and their centrum is very large. So they are considered to be one of the largest vertebrae in the human body, because their centrum is very large, and their centrum is large because they're at the lower back, so they need to support all the weight of the body. So their centrum is what stands out in that particular vertebrae. Their vertebrae, the centrum is very large, and their neural spine and transverse processes are wide and long to facilitate the powerful back muscles that are at your lower back. All right? So cervical, large neural canal, short neural spine, vertebral arterial canal, thoracic vertebrae, long neural spine, short transverse processes, which are like the arms of the vertebrae, right? And they have a very small neural canal. The lumbar vertebrae, long and wide transverse processes, long and wide neural spine to facilitate the attachment of powerful back muscles, and they have a very large centrum, right, in order to support the weight of the body. Now we're going to look at now the appendicular skeleton. So all of that was just the axial skeleton. We're going to look at the appendicular skeleton, which arms and leg, and you have the upper arms where the humerus are located, lower arms, you have the radius and the ulna, right? The upper leg, you have your femur, right? The lower leg, you have the tibia and the fibula at the lower leg, right? And also the lower arms, you have the carpals and the metacarpals and the phalanges. Going back to the diagram, that's why I said you need a diagram of the human skeleton. Right? So you need to know the different parts of the legs, the different parts of the arms, different muscles. So you have the phalanges, which are the tips, and you have the carpals, your hands. You have the ulna and the radius. All these are the lower arms. Upper arm, you have the humerus, and the legs. The upper leg, you have the femur, and you have the patella, which is the kneecap, and you have the tibia and fibula, which are your lower leg. And going down, you have the tarsal, metatarsals, and phalanges. Right? So I said it might be overwhelming now, but I tell you, you'll get it in time. Then a part of the appendicular skeleton is the girdles. And you have two types of girdles. You have the pectoral girdle and the pelvic girdle. The pectoral girdle are found in your shoulder, as seen on the diagram. So is a clavicle or your collarbone. You know, your collarbone. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. When you say that you're not eating well, you say your collarbone is sure. Right? That's what I call a clavicle. That's the bone that comes right here. The common name is a collarbone, but the scientific name is a clavicle. And you have the scapula, which is your shoulder blade. And these two bones form what is called a pelvic girdle. And these attach your arms to your axial skeleton. Then you have the pelvic girdle, which is made up of a pelvis. Right? And in females, the pelvis is wider in females than in the males. Because you know the females need that space for the carrying of the fetus or the unborn child during pregnancy, the gestation period. Right? So they have a wider pelvis than males do. Right? So that's the pelvic girdle. Now the structure of the bones, you need to know about the external and internal structure of the bones. Because you know the bones is a major part of the skeleton. The skeleton is made up of bones and cartilage. And the bones is made up of deposit minerals, mainly calcium, and collagen fiber. Now the minerals give bones its hardness, right? So you know you get a raw bone, it's kind of hard to break. But collagen gives it some form of flexibility. If your bone was just rigid, it would break easily. But there's some form of elasticity within your bone. It's not much, but it is there, and so it prevents the bone from not breaking easily. There's an experiment that you might have done where you extract the calcium from the bone, and after the calcium has been extracted, you realize that the bone is now flexible. That is because when you put it in acid, and you can do it at home with vinegar. So you get a raw chicken bone, put it in some vinegar, leave for a couple of days, and after you take it out, you realize that the bone is now flexible. You can bend it, twist it any way you want, because what happens is the vinegar will displace the calcium, leaving behind the collagen fibers. Right? So the bone is now flexible, because the collagen fiber is what gives the bone its flexibility, and the minerals like calcium gives it that rigidness. So the bone is made up of the epiphysis, which is top part, and lower part. These are the growing parts of bone. The epiphysis disc, consists of the growing parts of the bone. So at both ends of the bone, you have the epiphysis, that's the growing part of the bone. And then in the middle, you have the diaphysis, which consists of your compact bone, which is a hard part of the bone. At the epiphysis, you have the spongy bone, and that kind of helps to lower the density of bone. Without the spongy bone, then your bone will be quite heavy, right? And so it makes movement a little bit difficult. That's why birds have a lot of spaces in their bone, so that it reduces the weight of the bone. And in the middle now you have marrow. You have red and yellow marrow in the bone. That's in the middle. And the red marrow is for production of blood cells, and the yellow marrow is for storage of fats. All right, so the same diagram is showing here, but just up close. So the epiphysis, growing parts of the bone, all right, and then in the middle you have diaphysis, which is made up of compact bone, hard part of the bone, and in the bone now you have the yellow marrow and the red marrow. So the red marrow for production of blood cells, yellow marrow for storage of fat. So bone is actually a living tissue, right? So it may also sometimes, well, if you notice bones, you also have a small hole where blood vessels actually enter the bone, because bone is living, so it needs nutrients, oxygen, so forth, and it also needs to remove waste product as well. So bone is a living tissue. Now for movement to occur in the human skeleton, there must be joints. And joint is simple where two or more bones meet. That's just a basic definition for joints. Different types of joints in the human skeleton. You have the fibrous joints, and these are called immovable joints, so they're not movable at all. Like in the cranium, where the sutures in the cranium, those are called fibrous joints, so they are fixed joints. Right? Then you have cartilaginous joints, and these are what is found in your vertebrae. Right? So they involve, or they permit small amount of movement. Right? So they are partially movable joints. Then you have the synovial joints, which are the more dominant joints in your human skeleton. Right? And between them you have the synovial fluid. That's what they call synovial joint. And the synovial fluid serves as lubricant, so it helps the joints to move freely. For your syllabus, you need to know, able to draw and label a typical synovial joint. So you need to know all the different parts and their function. So between where the bones meet, you have the cartilage, and the cartilage serves to reduce friction between the bones. And then you have the synovial fluid that runs in the space. And the synovial fluid, as I said, is like a lubricant to reduce friction as well. And then one bone is connected to the other bone at the joint by ligaments. So ligaments attach bone to bone. Right? And then you have a synovial membrane, which secrete the synovial fluid. So this you need to know, be able to label and draw on an exam paper. So in addition to have a diagram of the human skeleton, you also need to have a diagram of a typical synovial joint, well labeled and annotated, so that you can know the functions of the different parts of the synovial joint. This diagram will show you different types of synovial joints that are there, but your syllabus basically function on two types, the hinge joint and the ball and socket joints. Right? So these joints have synovial fluid, they are fully movable, right? And they involve the hinge joints and the ball and socket, but there are more synovial joints in the body, but you just focus on those two. So the ball and socket, basically as the name suggests, the head of one bone does fit into the round depression in the other bone, called a round depression is called a acetabulum. Right? So the head fits into it, and so you have a wide range of movement. You have a 360 degrees movement with a ball and socket joint. The disadvantage, however, is that it dislocates very easily. The hinge joint, like hinges on a door, right? So it just gets movement in one plane, right? And these are found at the knee and the elbow, right? Movement in one plane. And the advantage is that they allow you to be able to lift weights without dislocating easily, right? Now the movement of limbs is important, and the movement of limb is facilitated by joints and muscles. And it takes two muscles to move a joint, because a muscle only exerts force or produce force when contracted. When lengthened, no force is produced during a muscle. Right? So for those of you who do physics, you know movement about a fulcrum. So the joint is basically a fulcrum, and the muscle is what produces the effort for the movement along the fulcrum. And we're going to tell you the different muscles that involve in movement of your forearm. All right, so this is the forearm, and we're going to describe how movement occurs in your forearm. All right, and I don't want to display it too much because, you know, my huge bicep might tear my shirt, but for you to flex your arm, what happens is that you have the bicep and the tricep, and these are called antagonistic muscles, meaning that they work against each other. So in moving the arm, again I said there are two muscles that are needed to move your arm because of the nature of muscles. They only produce force when contracted. So of course you need another muscles at the back to facilitate movement up and down. So for you to flex your arm, all right, what happens is that your bicep on top will contract, and you're going to pull on the ulna, right? And so your ulna goes up. At the same time, your tricep, which is found at the back of your humerus, is now going to relax. So when one muscle contracts, the other one will relax. All right? So the bicep would be your agonist, or your contracted muscle, and the tricep now will be your antagonist, which is the muscle that is doing the opposite to the bicep. So the bicep contract, pull on the ulna, your arm pull on the radius, pull on the radius and the ulna, all right, and the arm comes up and your tricep relaxes. If you're going to extend your arm, the opposite happens. The bicep now is going to relax and your triceps are going to contract and your arm is straightened. All right, so lifting your arms, bicep contract, tricep relax, your arms come up. To extend, your tricep will contract and your bicep relax. So antagonistic muscles, all right, biceps and the tricep. Same thing for your leg. All right, for you to extend the knee, what happens? Your quadriceps will contract and your hamstring will relax. For you to come back in the knee, hamstring contract, quadriceps relax. So two muscles work at a joint to bring about movement, and they're called antagonistic muscles because they tend to work against each other. All right, now supporting animals. So the skeleton alone can't give about supporting animals. As I said, there need to be muscles as well. So the two systems aids in movement and support. Right? So we're going to look at the type of muscles because they are such important for the body as well. So different types of muscles. You have the cardiac muscles found in your heart. These muscles work 24/7 without getting tired. I would say they don't get fatigue. Right? You have skeletal muscles. These are the ones that are attached to your skeleton, and these are the ones that brings about movement and support. They fatigue easily. Right? And then you have smooth muscles. These are the ones that are found within major organs of the body, along the digestive tract. Right? And they're the cardiac and the smooth muscles. Both of them are involuntary muscles, mean they are not under our conscious thoughts. Right? Where skeletal muscles is voluntary. Right? You can contract and relax them at will. Right? Now these muscles are connected to your bones via tendons. Later on, when we look earlier, when we're looking at joints, we mentioned ligaments. So ligaments connect bone to bone. Tendons connect muscles to bone. You need to know the difference between those two. So ligaments, bone to bone, and they are elastic. Right? They can stretch. Ligaments can stretch, but tendons are non-elastic, and they attach muscles to bone. That's why you can tear a tendon very easily because they are non-elastic. They do not stretch. So athletes sometimes have problem tearing their tendons. All right. So muscles bring support because they act on both sides of the bones and so help to bring about balance when the muscles are attached on either side of the bones. Without that, then, of course, you would have the skeleton will actually collapse if there are no muscles at all. And what you have is, even though you have big, strong skeleton, all you have is just a pile of mess. If there was no muscles attached to your skeleton, the skeleton could not be supported without the aid of muscles on either side of the bones, keeping them upright. Now that we look at animals, movement and support in animals, plants also need support as well. They do not undergo locomotion, right? But they involve in movement, but they too need to be supported, so they need to be erected, right? Coming from the soil. And how are plants supported? Right? Plants are supported by two means, physiological means and structural. So they have two types of support. So they have physiological support and structural support. And what do I mean by this? Physiological support has to do with the cells and the osmosis. Right? So later on, well, not later, or earlier in grade 10, you did transport of substances in and out of cell, and we look at osmosis and diffusion and all of that, and we see how water move in and out of cells. Right? So the turgidity is one way how plant offer support, and that is by physiological means. And I said that is not permanent. Right? The permanent is structural, which is due to lignin deposit within the cell wall. So plant support, physiological means by turgidity, of cells, and also structurally by lignin deposit in cells. So the turgidity, as I said, it's not permanent, right? So the plant may look like this because there's a fresh supply, a lot of supply of water in the soil. So as water moves into the cells, it increases the osmotic pressure within the cells, and so the cells become turgid. And as they become turgid, they help to support the plant. But as I said, this is not permanent because if not much water is in the soil, then what happens is that water is going to move out of the soil, move out of the cells in the plant, right, into the xylem, and that will result in the cell becoming flaccid. Right? So the cell is going to lose osmotic pressure, and so it will not be firm as it should, and so the plant will lose some form of support. And this is in like herbaceous plant, non-woody plants. Right? The next form of support is permanent, and this is due to lignin deposit that is found within the cell. For example, the xylem is thickened with lignin. Right? Over a period of time, this forms the wood in plant, and so this helps to bring some form of structural support to plant. So I hope you have learned a lot, and if you have any questions, remember, on today's lesson, send them into the various platforms, and we'll answer them for you. Until next time, I am Jerome Wright. Up next, we have Principles of Accounts. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
It's here. Interactive classes for all ages on the School Time channel on onespotmedia.com. With a combination of live Zoom classes and recorded class time, Schools Not Out lessons, and numerous educational content, we've created a comprehensive 24-hour channel dedicated exclusively to educating our nation's youth. Early childhood through to primary, secondary, and tertiary, it's one stop on one spot for education 24 hours. Brought to you by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in association with Television Jamaica Limited.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
Of stock. Before we delve, though, into the lesson, let us set its objectives. At the end of the lesson, students should be able to define the word stock, list correctly the 4 accounts that show the movement of stock. Students, at the end of the lesson, you should also be able to explain the usage of the 4 accounts used in the recording of the movement of stock. Students should be able to record how the purchase and the sale of goods by both cash and credit are posted to the ledgers. Last but not least, students, at the end of the lesson, you should be able to prepare ledger accounts to show clearly how the return of goods are posted in the ledgers. Sound practical? Come on, let's go. Can you recall, students, ever seeing the juice truck or the delivery van driving through the school gate, getting ready to make a delivery? Can you further recall an instance when mommy or daddy had to return something they bought to the shop, whether online or otherwise? And have you or possibly a classmate ever had to return something to the tuck shop, probably a stale bun? If your answer to one or at least one of these questions was yes, then with ease you should understand this topic, the asset of stock. But first, let's set a precedence. Let's find out what is stock. Any thoughts? Anyone out there? What is stock? All right, I'm hearing goods. All right, you're on track. Now, stock refers to goods bought previously which have not yet been sold. Goods bought previously which have not yet been sold. From all indication then, students, it sounds to me like we bought the stock in order to sell them back. Good? But while they're in the business, shelved or in the warehouse, yet to be sold, we will refer to them as our stock of goods. Now, students, the dealings of stock is relatively plenty. Sometimes we buy the stock, sometimes we sell the stock, sometimes you have the stock returning. Good? Either we, as the business, return it to our suppliers, or our customers return it to us. Now, as accountants, we try to be very systematic and orderly. So what we do, we actually set up 4 accounts in order to maintain or to track the movement of the stock. 4 accounts. What are these 4 accounts? Now, they are 1, purchases, returns outwards, sales, returns inwards. Let's go again. Purchases, returns outwards, sales, returns inwards. Now, listen carefully before we look at each of these accounts individually. 2 of these that we just mentioned actually cause the volume of our stock to increase, while 2 cause the volume of our stock to decrease. Can you guess which one does what? Purchases, increase, sales, what? I don't know. Think. Well, purchases and returns out inwards will cause an increase in stock. Purchase, we buy it, don't it? So we get it, don't it? We have more, right? So it causes an increase in stock. Likewise, returns inwards, and you'll see or better understand this a little later. Sales and returns outwards will cause a decrease in stock. Go ahead and reason that one. Now, as I said before, let's look at these accounts individually. Purchases, students, refer to stock or goods bought for resale. All right. Now, this can be done on a cash or a credit basis. Listen, I know. Make sure you have your pens, your papers, your ledger sheet, your calculators. If you don't have that, go and get them quickly. It's class time, and that will to win. Now, when we purchase goods, how do we record this in the ledger? We would open up a what? We would open up a, very good. We would open up a purchases account. Now, we can't pack all of the transactions related to stock in one big stock account. No, that may cause confusion, students, and we need to track the movement of the stock very carefully. So therefore, when we buy goods, we will open up what we call a purchases account to record those transactions. Now remember, stock is an asset. Good. And what type of asset is it again? A current asset. Good. Now, therefore, the rules that govern asset, students, the double entry rule that governs asset will also govern purchases, because purchases here is reflecting our stock bought. For refreshment, the double entry rule that governs asset states that whenever there's an increase in asset, we do what? Debit. And whenever there's a decrease in asset, we will credit. So therefore, when we purchase goods, students, we're going to have a what? Increase. So what will we do to the account? Very good. You're learning, man. Every child can learn and every child must learn. We will debit the account. And when there's a decrease, we're going to do what? Credit the account. All right, good. Moving on. Now, purchases, as said, represent an increase in stock. Therefore, what will we do again to record goods bought for resale in the purchases account? Will we debit or will we credit? If you were listening, we will debit to show an increase. Now let's analyze this example together. Ready? Good. March 2, 2016. We bought goods for cash, $200. We bought goods for cash. Whether we did have goods before or we never have goods, none at all. We've bought. If we're even moving from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 2, volume increasing or decreasing? Increasing. Good. Now, which two items would be affected by this one transaction? I am hearing goods. All right. And I'm also hearing cash. Let's go back to the first response that I just got, goods. Tell me what happened with the goods here. Did we buy the goods? Of course, we bought the goods. So which account again will we open to record this transaction? We will open up the, boom, purchases account. Very good. You're learning, man. All right. So therefore, when you see bought goods, students, do not open up an account and call it goods. Tell me the specific dealings of the goods. And that is that we have what? Bought the goods. So we're going to open up a purchases account to represent goods bought. And secondly, we're going to open up a cash account. Good. Now, the purchases account will be debited to show an increase in stock, while the cash account is going to be what? Credited to show a decrease in cash, which is an asset, all right? And stock is increasing too. That's why we're going to debit the purchases account and stock is an asset. Demonstration. You would have had your ledger sheet. Rule up. We're opening up the purchases account now. Good student? Don't forget, the left side of the ledger is always the debit side. The right side is the credit side. Now we just establish it that we're going to debit the purchases account, didn't we? Which side again is the debit side? The left side. Good. So you go to the ledger sheet now, students, and you enter the date. Which day did the transaction take place? March 2. Which year? 2016. You put that in the date column. Now, if you notice, I'm in the purchases account. The amount that we bought the goods for was $200. Good. Who say you not learn? So you put the $200 under the amount section. What is the name of the other item that was affected by this one transaction? We just said it. Cash. So therefore, in the details section, you're going to write what? Cash. Now, the cash account is found in which book? Or, come on, we spoke about that. It's found in the cash book. Because remember, the cash book is made up of both the cash account and the bank account. Good. So in the folio, you're going to put what? CB. And CB here stands for cash book. And this will tell us where we can find the other half of the double entry. See there, students? Debit the purchases account to show an increase in stock, March 2. And in the cash account, of course, it will be on the credit side looking like this. March 2, purchases, general ledger and the folio. Because the purchases account will be found in the general ledger. So you put it right beside purchases here. And the amount is $200. Not bad, not true. Getting it. Just remember, we're dealing with stock. And the double entry rules that govern asset govern also all the stock accounts. Now reason this one on your own. 2016, March 6, credit purchases $3,000 from T. Tom. Credit purchases. In our Jamaican language, native tongue, give me another word for credit. In this case, trust. Yes, we trust T. Tom's good. So we buy the goods, but we haven't paid T. Tom yet. How would we post this in the ledger? Credit purchases, $3,000 from T. Tom. Reason. The answer. You would debit the purchases because, again, students, we have bought goods. We have increased in stock. Stock is an asset. Whenever there's an increase in asset, we debit the account. And of course, we're going to credit T. Tom because we're increasing in liability. We've incurred a creditor. You see, you have to try and remember all of the lessons that I taught you before, because we're building. You cannot forget your basic principles, right? We will always recall, and I'll always ask you to refer back so you cannot forget the basic principles. Good. Now, here it is. Here in the ledger, say March 6 in the date column, 2016. On the debit side of the purchases account, because we're increasing in asset stock. Good, we put in the date. We put in the amount, which is what? $3,000. And the details will be what? T. Tom, and T. Tom is a creditor. So where would we find T. Tom's account? Go back to last week's lesson or even the one before. Creditors, trade creditors accounts are found in the purchases ledger. So in the folio, what will I have there? Not GL. We're going to have what? PL for purchases ledger, telling us that T. Tom's account is found in the purchases ledger. And if you notice, I have a numeral 3 there. Says the purchases ledger, page 3. Remember now, and me make up the page number. All right? Good. In the exams, they can give you the page number, or you may be asked to make up your own. So we're moving along. The corresponding entry would be in T. Tom's account, our creditor, in the purchases ledger. And remember now, we're increasing in this case in liability, so his account will not be debited, but his account will be credited. You were taught. Practice, practice, practice. You can't forget to practice. We're building students. So then, supposingly some of the goods that we bought, right, were spoiled. What would we do? No, I don't think we'd want to do that so quickly. Throw it away. That's an option, yes. But tell me something else that we could do. Return it. Of course. We could take it back to the supplier to say, hey, the box milk spoiled, Can we have an exchange? Good. Now, students, what kind of movement this for the stock? Is it coming in or going out? It's going out. And we're making a what? Give me an R word. I can't hear you. Project your voice some more. A return. Good. Therefore, students, if the goods were spoiled, what would we do? We would actually register or record it as in returning it, or after returning it, that is, we would record it as a returns outwards. Now, students, returning the goods, will it cause the business to have more goods now or less goods? We return it. Less. Good, because we no longer have it on the shelf or in the warehouse, don't it? Good. Now, students, it therefore goes to reason that this returns outward is going to have an effect on the amount of stock that we have. Good? A decreasing effect. What does the double entry rule say again? Whenever there's a decrease in asset, we will do what? Credit the account because we have less. So which account do you think we're going to open up now to record the goods that we are sending back to our supplier? We're going to open up a what? Think. But just before you give me your answer, let me give you a trivia to see how much you're learning. Based on the double entry principles, students, how is stock classified? Is it classified as a liability, capital, asset, or revenue? The answer is coming up. Just think. Now, let's go back to the return of the stock to our suppliers. So we say we're sending them out to the supplier, and we're making a return. And we're going to call this movement returns outwards. So what type of account then do you think we need to open up? Can we put those goods in the purchases account? No. If you do it, CSEC mark you wrong, because you never buy the goods, you're returning the goods. Therefore, students, we will have to open up what is known as a returns outwards account. Remember, every dealing of the stock or our stock have its own account. If we buy, we're going to record it in the purchases account. If we return the goods to the supplier, we're going to record it in what we call the returns outwards account. Students, let it stick. Now, another name for the returns outwards account is the purchases returns account. Makes sense, not true? Purchases return. And when we buy, we're returning. Stock bought for resale is now being returned. So we call it the purchases returns account or the returns outwards account. Now, let's look at an example. You remember on March 6th, I think, we bought some goods from T-Tom. Now, March 13, we decided that we're going to return some goods to T-Tom. Now, which two accounts would be affected? Give me one term for return goods to the supplier. That would be what? Returns outwards. So we're going to open up then a returns outwards account. Returns outwards, again, student, is representing our stock movement. Are we going to have more stock now, or are we going to have less stock? We're going to have less. Whenever there's a decrease in stock, which is an asset, we should do what? Credit the account. So we're going to go then on the credit side of the returns outwards account. We will put in our date. Yes? And what's the date? March 13. And the year is what? 2016. The amount was how much? $50 worth of goods are being returned. So we put the amount under the amount, $50 under the amount section. Notice the details is blank and we're in the returns outwards account. What will we write in the details? The name of the other item that has been affected. And that would be what? T-Tom. Very good. Folio is absent. What will we put in the folio column? Where will we find T-Tom's account again? In the purchases ledger. Very good. And why? Because he's a creditor. Telling us you're not learning, you know. Just keep on keeping on. Success is on the way for you. Now, this is what we would have on the credit side. See it? Easy like cheese. Once you bear in mind the double entry rules, you have nothing to fear. All right. And of course, that's a credit entry in the returns outwards account. So this is what it would look like for the debit entry in T-Tom's account. And we'll be reducing in liability because we're giving back T-Tom's his goods, right? So we're going to debit T-Tom's account. Not bad, don't it? So we can buy goods, and we call that what? Purchases. That's one movement. And we can also return goods to our suppliers. And we call that movement what? Returns outwards. Now, students, there's another dealing as it relates to stock. We can also what? Sell goods. Now, one word that describes goods sold, we call that what? Sales. Let me show you now. Focus your attention on the whiteboard. Now, sales can be done on a credit or cash basis. And remember, sales refer to goods sold. All right? Can be done on a cash or a credit basis. Yes, I can sell some persons your goods and your customers' goods and then pay you right away. Or some customers may give you an IOU. Next week when them get the partner, who to tell? Now, how would we record then sales in the ledger? We would open up our what? Think. Miss Wicked today, she just have you thinking. No, this is teaching. You have to think. We would open up what we call a sales account. Good. So purchases account for goods bought, returns outwards account for goods returned to our suppliers, and sales account for goods sold. Hope you got that right. Now, when we sell goods, does sales represent an increase in stock or a decrease in stock? Will it cause us to have more stock or will it cause us to have less stock? Less, of course. We sell the goods. All right. Now, will we debit this account then or credit it? Come on, we're talking about stock. We sell some goods. Stock is an asset. Whenever there's a decrease in asset, what should we do again? Credit. Good. So where we would credit the sales account. And another thing is that sales is our revenue and we're increasing in revenue. But so we would credit the account, but that's for another lesson. Let's look at it now from the perspective or the angle of being a stock. All right? Stock account. Now, let's analyze this transaction. 2016, May 10, credit sales to M. Mott. You know what that means? We sold goods on credit to M. Mott. Which two items would be affected here? Don't tell me credit sales. Yes, sales and M. Mott. So therefore, we're going to need two accounts. We're going to need the sales account and we're also going to need M. Mott's account. Now, sales will be representing a what? Increase or a decrease in stock? Come on, pay attention, focus. Yes, it's going to represent a decrease. Beautiful. Stock is an asset. Whenever there's a decrease in assets, what are we going to do? Credit the account. So here we would credit the sales account and we would debit M. Mott's account. Don't forget, again, reminder, increase in asset, you debit. Decrease in asset, you credit. All right? Double entry rules for assets. And stock is an asset. Now, demonstration on the credit side of the sales account. Here we are crediting because we are having a decrease in stock, which is an asset. We put the date in, March 13. We put the amount, $350. And in the details, we will have M. Mott, the name of the other item that was affected. Folio is empty. We sold goods on credit to M. Mott. What did I teach you before? Persons whom we have sold goods to on credit are known as our what? Trade debtors. Good. And our trade debtors are found in accounts, are found in which ledger? Sales ledger. All right. So in the folio account, you should have sales ledger. Again, or SL. Again, I have a 6 beside it, and that represents the what? Page number. And who made it up? Me. All right. Good. Now, M. Mott's account would be debited to show or to complete the double entry. All right. Now, imagine for a moment that we sell the goods to M. Mott. But there was a box of milk that M. Mott didn't order in terms of brand. Wrong brand was sent to her. What do you think she should do with the milk? Drink it anyway? No. She probably can't do that. What if the brand happened to hurt her tummy when she drinks it? You want her to have diarrhea? What do you think she can do? All right, of course. Return it to the business and ask for an exchange, don't it? Now, students, what type of return is this? Is the goods coming back to us or is it going out? The box milk coming into us, it's being returned to us. So what type of return do you think we're going to call that? Think. All right, returns inwards. Remember now, returns outwards when we send it back to the supplier. Returns inwards when the what? Customer returns it to us, inward movement. Now, what are some common reasons for returns inwards? Wrong order, quantity, size or description, and probably spoilage. Could be a case where the box milk was even spoiled, you know, and the young lady couldn't drink it, so she had to return it to us. Or possibly the product was damaged on arrival. Now, when there's a returns inwards, we normally write up what is known as a credit note. Go and research it. And when there's a returns outwards, we normally write up what is known as a debit note. I'm going to ask you again, you know, at another time when you least expect it. So make sure that you can differentiate between a credit note and a debit note. All right? You're laughing? I'm not joking. All right. Now, don't forget that the fact that the goods come back to the business, we call it returns inwards. Hence, we will need to open up a returns inwards account. And another name for the returns inwards account would be what, students? Let me hide it. When we bought the goods and we returned it to our suppliers, we called it what? Purchases returns, don't it? So what do you think we're going to call this one if we sell the goods and the customer carry it back to us? A sales returns. Good. So another name for the returns inwards account is the sales returns account. Don't forget. Now, let's try this. March 18, L Love returned goods to us, $450. Which two items would be affected? Remember now, every time you get the transaction, you must identify the two items that are affected. Then you apply the double entry rule accordingly. Now, L Love returned goods to us, $450. Which two items are affected? What are the two nouns? L Love and goods. All right? If you say goods, I agree. But remember, you can't just open up an account and call it goods account. You must specify the movement or the dealing of the goods. So what happened here with the goods? L Love returned the goods to us. Good. So which specific account you're going to open up now to track this transaction? Returns inwards. So the two accounts that we would need now would be L Love and returns inwards. So L Love returned goods to us, $450. Let's see how we would do that in the ledger. But just before we get to that, let me just tell you. But an alternative name for returns inwards account is what? Is it the purchases account, the sales account, the purchases returns account, or the sales returns account? Answer is coming up. And if you ever get it wrong. All right. So March 18, 2016, L Love returned goods to us, $450. The goods coming back to us will cause an increase. If you said decrease, you're wrong, because we are getting back the goods. So we have to record it. All right. So returns inwards is a stock account being governed by the same double entry rule that govern all assets. So whenever there's an increase in asset, what will we do to the account again, students? We are going to debit the account. So here we come now on the debit side of the return inwards account, students. 2016 March 18, you see that in the date column. 2016 March 18, debit side. The amount of goods that Love returned to us valued $450. So in the amount section, you're going to record $450. Details column here is blank. What should I write? Come on, child, pay attention. What should I write? I'm in the returns inwards account. The name of the corresponding item or the other item that was affected, which is what? Love. Look for the nouns. Love. So in the details, I'm going to put Love. And Love is a debtor, trade debtor. So Love's account would be found in the sales ledger. And of course, we make up the page number again, students, page 4. So that would be the debit entry showing the returns inwards. And you can do the credit entry to show how it would look in Love's account. All right? Now, answer to trivia number 1. Based on the double entry principles, how are stock classified? Or how is stock classified? Very good. Stock is classified as an asset. Wonderful. And our answer to trivia number 2, an alternative name for the returns inwards account is the sales returns account. Now, what are the key points emanating out of today's lesson, students? The double entry rule that governs the stock account accounts is the same that govern assets. The 4 accounts which are used to keep a check on the movements of stock are 1, say it with me, purchases account for the what? Purchase of goods. 2, sales account for the what? Sales of goods. 3, returns inwards account for the what? For goods returned to the business by customers. Returns outwards for goods returned by the firm to its what? Suppliers. Continuing, key points. Purchases account always carry a debit balance. It's a stock item. However, if we happen to credit it in error, right, then it may differ. The sales account always carry a credit balance only in the case when we had initially debited it by error. I have a third trivia for you. Which of the following is entered in the purchases account of a grocery store? And I see this as a very common multiple choice question, student. So you can mark this one. Which of the following is entered in the purchases account of a grocery store? Is it A, computers, B, goods for resale, C, office stationery, D, duplicating machines? Of course, the answer is goods for resale. Now I want you to take a snapshot of your assignment. You're going to identify the specific movement for each stock below, or identify the specific movement of stock for each of the transactions below, and then post them to the ledgers. 2016, March 10, sold goods for cash, $10,000. Same 2016, March 12, bought goods on credit from D small, $5,000. March 16, we returned goods to D small, $30. Students, we've had a wonderful class, I would want to assume. I just want you to remember this and remember it always. And I'd like for you now to focus here on the whiteboard. The 4 movements of stock, we always end it with the letter S. Students tend to make an error and say sale, purchase, return inwards, return outward. No, keep the S. So we have sales, purchases, returns inwards, and we also have returns outwards. I love to point this out, the S, because the S represents the letter that start the word stock, don't it? So don't forget, our 4 accounts that show the movements of stock or track the movement of stock are sales, purchases, returns inwards, and returns outwards. Students, that's all for today's lesson. If you have any question though, send them to the Ministry of Education and Television Jamaica's social media pages. I'm Latoya Chambers-Hogg, and it's been a pleasure being with you this morning. Up next, Cape Chemistry. Have a good one, and remember, do keep safe.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
Hello, we're back with more in Cape Chemistry. We'll be continuing our journey today looking at forces of attraction. I'm Ricardo Price. Let's get into it. So, today, before we get into today's presentation, let's take a recap of what we did last time in CAPE. So, last time we stated the various forces of attraction, that is ionic, covalent, metallic, hydrogen bonding, and we also had taken a look at van der Waals forces of attraction. We also stated the relationship between forces of attraction and the states of matter. We also related the physical properties of matter to the different strengths of the intermolecular forces. So if you had a strong intermolecular force of attraction, more than likely that substance would be a solid. If it was intermediate, it would be a liquid. If it was weak, it would more than likely be a gas. Now, before we get into today's lesson, let's take a look at the objectives from the CAPE Unit 1 syllabus. The first objective says that we should describe dative covalent bonding. We should also describe the origins of intermolecular forces, specifically hydrogen bonding, permanent dipole, and van der Waals forces of attraction. We should also predict the shapes and bond angles in simple molecules using a concept known as the Vsepr Theory, which we will get into later on in this session. And finally, we should explain the shapes and bond angles in simple organic compounds, making reference to hybridization and resonance. I know this might seem a lot for one session, but if we don't accomplish all these objectives, we can simply continue next time. Now, let's take a look at dative covalent bonding or dative coordinate bonding. You can use the terms interchangeably. Now, before we get into what is dative covalent bonding, we need to know what is covalent bonding. So let's recap. Covalent bonding is a bonding interaction between two atoms where the bond is made up of a shared pair of electrons. So if you have atom A and atom B bonding to each other in a covalent fashion, atom A would give one electron to that bond, and atom B would give one electron to that bond. So a covalent bond, every bond is made up of two electrons, and it's important to bear that in mind because some of the other concepts that we'll touch on later on in the presentation, you need to know that a bond has two electrons in it. Now, so essentially that is a covalent bond. Two nonmetals bonding to each other, and they're sharing the electrons in that bond. In that one atom donates one electron and another atom donates the other electron. But in a dative covalent bond, it says dative covalent bond is a covalent bond in which a single atom contributes both pairs of electrons that make up that bond. That means if you have atom A and atom B forming a covalent bond, in a dative covalent bond, the two electrons that make up that bond are coming from atom A. And atom B contributes no electrons to that bond. So a bond like that is what we call a dative covalent bond. And I'll show you guys some examples. Now, it says this happens when a molecule possesses a lone pair of electrons. So halogens, water, ammonia, these species that have a lone pair of electrons can take part in dative covalent bonding, as well as species that have an empty orbital or is positively charged. And I'll show you guys on this slide. Now, if we should look at ammonia, this is the structure of ammonia, NH3. The nitrogen in ammonia has a lone pair of electrons on it. And if we should react ammonia with something like HCl, hydrogen chloride, right? The ammonia, the lone pairs on ammonia can interact with the hydrogen on HCl and abstract that hydrogen to generate NH4 plus. Now, I want you guys to make note of something. Notice when the hydrogen was bonded to the chlorine, you can see that one of the electrons that are being shared between the hydrogen and chlorine, one of the electrons was green, meaning that it was from the hydrogen, and the other one was blue, meaning that it was from the chlorine. But when ammonia abstracted that hydrogen, both electrons are left on the chlorine. Therefore, this new bond that is generated between the abstracted hydrogen and ammonia is a dative covalent bond, because the hydrogen is not contributing any electrons to that bond. All the electrons are coming from ammonia. Another scenario is when ammonia reacts with Bf3. Now, you know that there's a lone pair of electrons on ammonia already. And I'm saying that on Bf3, on the boron in Bf3, there is an empty p orbital. But how do I know that there's an empty orbital there? We can simply count the valence electrons around the boron. So, if we should look at the 3 shared pair of electrons around boron from those 3 fluorine atoms, we would get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2 from each fluorine atom being shared between each fluorine atom, right? So boron has 6 valence electrons around it. And we know that it can hold a maximum of 8 valence electrons on the second energy level. We know that. Therefore, it needs 2 more electrons to complete its octet or to attain an electronic configuration with 8 electrons on the valence energy level. Those 2 electrons can come from something like ammonia that has a lone pair of electrons. It can also come from water. It doesn't necessarily have to come from ammonia. Ammonia is just a good example, right? It can come from a halogen because halogens have these lone pairs of electrons around them. It can come from water. Water has 2 lone pairs of electrons on the oxygen. Now, what happens since boron has an empty p orbital? It can accept these lone pairs of electrons from a species like nitrogen and form that product that we see there that is called, this combined product is what we refer to as an adduct. So that's ADDUCT, adduct. And this interaction where the nitrogen bonds or binds to the boron is the dative covalent bond. Now, one might be wondering where do all these intermolecular forces come about? How did hydrogen bonding come about, ionic bonding come about? Now, all of these interactions, covalent, ionic, dipole moment, all of these things, they have the same, are a similar concept that governs all of these intermolecular forces, and I'll touch on that a bit. Now, intermolecular forces or IM forces arise due to electrostatic interactions between molecules. It says this is due to the difference in electron distribution within each atom. I'll read what's on the slide and then I'll break it down for you guys. This creates what we call a dipole and results in the more negative areas of a molecule being attracted to the more positive areas of a molecule. So, in a molecule, you have atom A and atom B, right? If atom A is a lot more electronegative than atom B, therefore the electron density would lie more on the side that has the more electronegative element, right? For instance, HCl. I'll use HCl again in another example, in a slide, in an upcoming slide. You have chlorine here, you have hydrogen here, right? And there's a bond between the two. Electrons are being shared. We know that chlorine, a halogen, is a lot more electronegative than hydrogen. Therefore, chlorine would pull most of the electron density towards itself. Therefore, chlorine would develop a slight negative charge around it. And since hydrogen is having its electrons pulled away, it is getting slightly positive because it's losing negative charge. Therefore, you have these polar compounds being present, right? Or a dipole being created. Now, the whole concept is based on negative charges being attracted to positive charges. All of these intermolecular forces deal with that same concept, right? So if you should have something positively charged being close to the chlorine would have an interaction with that positively charged species. For instance, you have metal ions in the presence of HCl. The metal cations would interact with the chlorine because the cation is positively charged and the chlorine is negatively charged. Now, I'll expound on that a bit, but first we'll look at hydrogen bonding to help explain what I'm trying to bring across. Now, with hydrogen bonding, this involves a hydrogen attached to an electronegative element. And that hydrogen is interacting with another electronegative element through what we call a hydrogen bond. Now, if we should look at the water molecule, we know that water is H2O, right? And we know that oxygen is a lot more electronegative than hydrogen is. Therefore, in that OH bond, you'd have the electrons being a lot closer to the oxygen than it is to the hydrogen. Therefore, since oxygen has excess electron density around it, it would bear a slightly negative charge. So oxygen would be slightly negative, as you can see from the diagram. And the hydrogens would bear a slightly positive charge because the electrons are being pulled towards the oxygen and away from the hydrogen. So since the oxygen is negative, therefore it can interact with positively charged species around it. And if you should have a tank of water, you have millions of water molecules just flowing over each other, coming into contact on a regular basis. Now, when the water molecules come into contact, the negatively charged oxygen is going to coordinate to the positive charge atom in the next molecule. And the positively charged atom in the next molecule is a hydrogen from another water molecule. So water is actually interacting with itself in this fashion. Now, hydrogen bonds don't only take place with water molecules. You have hydrogen bonding in DNA, you have hydrogen bonding in proteins and other molecules, right? It just needs a hydrogen bonded to an electronegative element, and that hydrogen should be interacting with another electronegative element. So since the hydrogen is positive, it would be interacting with a negatively charged element, a non-metal. Right? So that is the concept of a hydrogen bond. Now, let's take a look at the permanent dipole. Now, it says this happens when two atoms that are bonded to each other in a molecule differ greatly in electronegativities. And I had mentioned this earlier. Now, the example that I used was HCl. So you can see here where chlorine is a lot more electronegative than hydrogen. Therefore, the chlorine pulls most of the electron density from within that bond to itself. Therefore, chlorine develops a slightly negative charge. That symbol above chlorine that you see, that's delta, negative. Delta is a Greek letter, and we use it to show that the atom bears a partial negative charge or a partial positive charge. Now, so we can see that the chlorine atom is negative while the hydrogen atom is positive. And we use the term permanent dipole, permanent because it is ever present within that molecule. Dipole, di means two, pole means charge, or it refers to the charge. Therefore, we permanently have two charges. So you can break down the name and understand what it's trying to say. So since we permanently have two charges, those two charges are a positive charge and a negative charge. And the negative charge is around the chlorine, the positive charge is around the hydrogen. Therefore, the negative chlorine can interact with positively charged species. And in this case, if you should have a reagent bottle of HCl, the chlorine will always be interacting with hydrogens of another HCl molecule because it's negative and it's positive. So the point that I'm trying to bring across is that all of these intermolecular forces have the same concept. They have a negative charge interacting with a positive charge. Now, you have cases where the molecule is not polar. It's non-polar, right? And we'll touch on that a bit. Now, we'll look at van der Waals forces of attraction, right? Specifically, something we call an instantaneous dipole. It says that it usually involves non-polar, simple, covalent molecules. But why would something non-polar, having no charge, interact with another molecule that has no charge? And I'll explain how that happens. Now, picture the chlorine atom. You can see the chlorine atom on the screen actually. So the chlorine molecule is two chlorine atoms bonded to each other. Now, they're the same atoms, so they have the same electronegativities. So you can't have one chlorine atom having a greater electron density around it than the other chlorine atoms. They're the same, they have the same electron density, so you have even distribution of electron density. But if that chlorine atom were to come into contact or close proximity to another chlorine atom, this is what would happen. So here you have the chlorine atom, this chlorine atom approaching the other chlorine atom. The electron density in this molecule, would repel the electron density in the other molecule and push the electrons to the far side, while this side would develop a slightly positive charge. So what happens is what we call an induced dipole, right? So in order for two things to attract, you must have negative and positive charges, right? So let's move to the board. So we have the chlorine molecule, right? With equal electron distribution. When the other chlorine atom approaches, it would have an even distribution as well. But since these electrons don't like other electrons, electrons repel each other. Electrons are attracted to positive charges and it repels negative charges. So since this chlorine molecule has a big electron density around it, when it approaches this one, these electrons repel the electrons in this molecule and essentially push it over this side. Therefore, a slightly negative charge would develop on that side and a slightly positive charge would develop on this side of the molecule. What that does is that since this is now positive, the electrons here are attracted to that positive charge. And what happens is that, so this is the chlorine atom. Sorry, it should be the other way around. So what happens? Chlorine atom, chlorine atom. So what happens? Since this is positively charged, the electrons in this molecule are attracted to that positive charge. And you see a shift in the electron density. So this outline here represents the electron distribution, the electron density around the molecule. chlorine, chlorine, delta positive, delta negative. So now there is an attractive force between the two. And this is what we call an induced or instantaneous dipole. It's not permanent, so it's not as strong as a hydrogen bond or something in HCl. It's just this molecule induced the other molecule to develop a dipole. So it's a very weak interaction, and it breaks down over distance. But as we've seen in molecules such as iodine, if you have a lot of van der Waals interactions, the additional interactions can result in the molecule being a solid. So if you have a lot of them, it can be a strong interaction. But individually, it's very weak. Right? And it breaks down over distance. So, back to the screen. It says it involves nonpolar simple covalent molecules like chlorine. A temporary dipole is created as molecules approach each other. So that one molecule induces the other molecule to develop a dipole. And the interaction is very weak, and as the molecules move apart, they go back to their original state where you have an even distribution of electron density around the atoms. Now, let's move on to VSEPR, or valence shell electron pair repulsion theory. Now, in this section, I want you guys to take out your pens or your pencils and your books, because you have a lot of writing to do. You have some simple calculations, nothing too complex. But you have to be involved in this section. It's not the easiest of sections. You can easily make mistakes here. So I want you guys to follow as much as possible. So we'll just shorten it and call it VSEPR. And it's valence shell electron pair repulsion. So you have to bear in mind that electrons repel other electrons, right? And it says this is a concept used in chemistry to predict the shapes and geometries of molecules. Now, it says the premise is based on electron-electron repulsion, which I just mentioned, and it's in the name, valence shell electron pair repulsion theory, right? But before we get into it, let's define some terms. What is a lone pair? A lone pair is simply a pair of electrons on an atom or molecule. What is a bonding pair? A bonding pair is a shared pair of electrons in a covalent bond. Now, remember I was saying that in a bond you have two electrons, right? If you have atom A being bonded to atom B in a covalent fashion, you have two electrons in that bond, right? And that is what we call a bonding pair. So, lone pairs of electrons repel other lone pairs of electrons as well as bonding pairs. So what I'm trying to say is that if you should have this is one lone pair and this is another lone pair. If those lone pairs were right next to each other, they would repel each other greatly because their electrons, negative charges repel negative charges, right? And if a lone pair was next to a bonding pair, it would repel that as well because the bonding pair contains electrons, right? And bonding pairs repel themselves as well. Bonding pairs repel other bonding pairs. And I'll use some examples. So now everything might seem a bit blurry, but I'll break it down for you guys. Now, so these are the rules, and I want you guys to write down these rules. This will be on YouTube, so you can access it on YouTube, pause the video, and write down these rules, right? So the first step in identifying a molecule, for instance, a teacher would give you a question and say, okay, predict the shape of Bf3. So they'll give you the molecular formula, but you would have to predict the shape of that molecule. So the first rule says that you should identify the central atom. This is a typo. It should not be central metal. It should be central atom. So the first thing says identify the central atom or element. And it's usually the least electronegative atom. The next one says draw the molecule in the simplest possible geometry with all the atoms as far from each other as possible. Now, we do this because we want to ensure that all the bonding pairs are as far from each other as possible, because the bonding pairs have electrons in them and we don't want to draw all the bonding pairs right next to each other. So we try to space them out as far from each other as possible. The next one says we should then sum the number of valence electrons in each atom. And then once we sum that and we get our total, we should subtract the number of bonding electrons from the total, because the bonding electrons, the bonds have electrons in them. So we'll subtract that total from the total valence electrons. It might not seem very clear now, but when we work on example, you'll see what I mean. Just ensure that you write down these steps. The next step says the remainder of the electrons should be added to the outer atoms. So if you have excess electrons, we should put those excess electrons around the outer atoms until the orbital is completely full, right? So in other words, if you have fluorine as the outer atom, you should put electrons around fluorine until you have 8 electrons around fluorine. The last point says that now that we have our structure, we should apply the Vsepr theory and use the lone pairs of electrons to repel the bonding pairs. And once the lone pairs of electrons start repelling the bonding pairs, that's when you would get the shape of the molecule in question. Now, we can move on to some questions. We'll predict the shape of Bf3 and H2O. But it's important to note this section up here. It says that lone pair repulsion, that is 2 lone pairs right next to each other, the repulsion that would generate is a lot greater than a lone pair bonding pair repulsion, or a bonding pair repulsion. So if you have 2 bonding pairs, imagine that my arms are bonds and they're right next to each other. They will repel each other because they have electrons in them, right? They will repel each other. But if you have 2 electrons, imagine that my fists are electrons. If you have 2 lone pairs of electrons next to each other, that would repel each other at a greater extent than 2 bonding pairs would repel each other. And that's because in the bonding pair, the electrons are dispersed, are distributed throughout that bond. So it's not concentrated in a specific location like a lone pair. A lone pair is fixed in that position, right? It's not as dispersed as a bonding pair. So the first question says that we should predict the geometry of Bf3. In other words, predict the shape of Bf3. And we'll apply the concepts that we just used. So let me just erase this and then we'll start the question. It's a bit rocky. All right. So they gave us the molecular formula and they said that it was Bf3, right? They said the molecular formula is Bf3. Bf3. So the first thing that we should do is identify the central atom. Fluorine is very electronegative. Boron, not so electronegative. It's more electropositive. So I'm predicting that boron would be my central atom, right? In this case, it's a metal. So I'm writing boron. And then I should put these outer atoms, so the fluorines would be the outer atoms, because since we selected boron as our central metal, the fluorine has to be the outer atoms. So we should place the fluorines around the boron in a fashion, in such a way that the fluorine atoms are as far from each other as possible. So, since there are 3 fluorine atoms, I'm placing them in this fashion, right? Now, the next step says that we should count the valence electrons within each atom. So, boron. So you need a periodic table for this one. So, hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron. Boron is the 5th element. It has 3 valence electrons. So let's add them up. So boron has 3. And fluorine is in group 7, meaning it has 7 valence electrons. So fluorine has 7 valence electrons, right? But there are 3 fluorine atoms. So we have to multiply that by 3. So we would get 21 for this one. And if you should add 21 to 3, you would get 24. Now, we have a total of 24 valence electrons. Now, what we should do next is to subtract the bonding electrons from this total. This is telling me that this system right here has a total electron count, valence electron count of 24. So since we have 2, there's an electron here, electron here, electron here, electron here. Because 2 electrons make up a bond, it's important to note that. So since each of these bonds have 2 electrons, that's a total of 6 electrons. So what I have to do here is to minus 6 from the 24, and I'll end up with 18 electrons. So now, let me just rub out this to prevent confusion. So now I have 18 electrons to spread over this entire molecule. And the rule says that we should place them on the outer atoms first and ensure that their orbitals are completely full. Now, this fluorine has 2 electrons so far. 2 electrons because it's sharing the 2 in this bond right here. So it needs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more electrons to complete its octet. So therefore, we have to minus 6 from this, and we end up with 12. And then we have to do the same for this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we minus 6 again from that, and we end up with 6. So now we have 6 electrons left, and we have 1 atom left. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that. We have no more electrons, so we can't put any electrons on the central atom. If we had put an electron on the central atom, what would happen is that that lone pair would have repelled the bonding pairs, and the shape of the molecule would be changed. But since we didn't put any lone pairs on this central atom, no lone pair bonding pair repulsion can take place. Thus, the shape of this molecule remains as is. And this is what we call trigonal planar. So this is a trigonal planar geometry, right? It's like a triangle, and it's flat. Right, so let's look at the shape for water. And I'll bring it up right there, and I'll show you how we come about getting this. So I'll rub off this section right now. So I'll rub off this part, the calculations part. So, the molecule that we're working with is H2O. right? Now, this is an anomaly in that normally we say when selecting the central atom, it's usually the more electronegative atom, but sometimes it's the atom that is represented the least. Like for instance, in this case, you have 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. So in this case, oxygen is the central metal. In the Bf3 case, you had 1 boron and 3 fluorine atoms. So usually the central atom occurs the least in the molecular formula. So let's work this one quickly. So we have O, H, H, right? So you draw it in the simplest representation with the bonding pairs as far as from each other as possible. Oxygen, hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. It's the 8th element. Therefore, it has 6 electrons when you write out the electronic configuration. 6 electrons on the valence energy level. So oxygen has 6. Hydrogen has 1. But there are 2 hydrogens. So we have a total of 8 electrons to play around with. So this system should have 8 electrons spread over it. Now, we have 2 bonding pairs. And each bonding pair has 2 electrons. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 electrons. So we have to subtract 4 from 8 and we'll have 4 electrons remaining. So, since we have 4 electrons remaining, the rule says that we should add these 4 electrons to the outer atoms first to ensure that their orbitals are completely full. But what is the outer atom here? It's hydrogen. Hydrogen can have a maximum of 2 electrons on its valence shell, or energy level, sorry. And it already has 2 because it's sharing these 2. So we can't put any more electrons around these hydrogens. So you have to check that. Oxygen, on the other hand, has 1, 2, 3, 4 electrons around. And we know that oxygen can hold a maximum of 8. Therefore, we put these lone pairs on the oxygen like that. Now we end up with a system like this. So what would happen here is that you would have the lone pairs repelling each other. And the lone pairs would also be repelling the bonding pairs. So the lone pairs would repel each other so strongly that it would bend the water molecule into a shape like this. And the lone pairs would be here. So the lone pairs push themselves apart, and in so doing it pushes the bonding pairs away from the lone pairs. So it would rather a conformation where the bonding pairs are closer to each other than a situation where the lone pairs are closer to each other. And this is called a V-shaped conformation, right? So this is how Vsepr is used to predict the shape of the molecule. We can continue with Vsepr and the other concepts next week. So we'll wrap up now. So that's all we have for our discussion in forces of attraction today. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you have understood the points we discussed. If not, you can catch a repeat of today's lesson on JNN today at 4 p.m. and in class time. Highlights of the week's programs are also on Saturday between 1 and 4 p.m. and on video on demand on One Spot Media. We also have 2 channels to help with additional lessons devoted to students of all ages on One Spot Media School Time and School Time Maths. So check them out. Remember to keep safe, wash your hands regularly, sanitize, and wear your mask.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.